Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning. It's a wonderful Thursday to all the people here this morning, at least it's morning with us. My name is Maria Clara Araújo. I am the coordinator of partnership movements here at the Black Feminist Movement, and we are very, very happy with another edition of the series Black Politics Feminist Series. This series is a part of our project, our strategy of following up and the non-financial support given to Black feminist groups that we support. And we are very happy that finally we come to this fourth edition of the series of Black feminist politics. Today, we are going to have the opportunity of listening directly from Black feminist movements that are proposing solutions, alternative solutions, and literally creating other possible worlds in terms of climate justice. We know that currently the world is geared towards a debate about climate justice, about how we may change the climate reality that is currently given. And as a movement, a Black feminist movement, we believe that this debate needs to necessarily go through the perspectives of Black feminists. We believe that Black feminist movements are proposing solutions and creating new worlds, other worlds, and this is the landmark of this understanding that as Black feminist group, we are announcing which groups are going to be the first ones to be supported by what we call the Fund for Black Feminist Groups. And this is going to be a new way of funding for the Black Feminist Fund. In its first edition, we are going to support alternatives to the worlds that are created by Black feminist groups that are proposing solutions, alternative solutions, new perspectives to climate justice. And the Black Feminist Fund, in briefly, is going to, very shortly, is going to announce the awarding for our new funding, which is the Fund for Black Feminist Worlds. In this fourth edition, we are going to talk about climate justice. We also believe that this moment is important. It's important that we express our solidarity with the region of the Caribbean that has recently been impacted by the Hurricane Melissa. And we are going to share some links of donation campaigns in case you may provide support to groups that are trying to mitigate the damage caused by the hurricane Melissa. But as Black feminist group, we know it's necessary not only to fund mitigation, but the preparation. We need solutions that are going to ensure our safety and security for ourselves and for our territories before disasters happen. So thank you for joining us today, and we are going to start our debate. I am now would like to invite our moderator, the person who's going to moderate our conversation, and Tássia Mendonça. Tássia Mendonça is from Brazil as well. She is a doctoral student in the multidisciplinary studies of ethnic studies and African studies at the Federal University of Bahia, and she's got over 15 years of experience working with civil society and philanthropy. She's been cooperating for the empowerment of organizations and collectives that are led by Black women. She currently works as a consultant for philanthropic organizations. We also have her as one of the fellows for the Black Feminist Fund. Thank you, Tássia. Thank you so much, Maria Clara. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. You are welcome here in this space. We have some people who are trying to have access to interpretation, and there is at the end of the screen, you click on the three dots. I don't know if we can once again show the information because there's people asking for guidelines, and I am going to continue introducing myself. Thank you, Maria Clara. I am a Brazilian. I'm speaking from Rio de Janeiro. It's a great joy for me to be a fellow of the Black Feminist Fund in this last year, to have participated in this group of women who are engaged in philanthropy and how the Black feminist movement all over the world. Welcome to this series, Black Feminist Politics series, a political series of the Black Feminist Fund. It is a great joy to be here and contribute to the conversation surrounded by activists of the Black Feminist Fund. I thank you, BFF, for the trust. As Maria Clara has stated, our conversation is going to be about our participation in building new worlds, combating climate injustice, and gender expensive people are also confronting these issues, these extractivist industries, while we build sustainable alternatives. This month is a strategic month for Black women, Black feminist movements in confronting environmental racism, as many of you know. As many of you know, this month, Brazil is more specifically, Belém is hosting the conference of the United Nations about climate change, COP30, and it is in this context of effervescence, in these official spaces of negotiation, in order to address the complexities and the urgencies prompted by environmental crisis in joining the struggle against climate injustice. And I would like to introduce myself to you. I am going to invite to our conversation Gemma Tavares, who is an Afro-Mexican leader, founder, and coordinator for Afro Caracoles. She is responsible for Afrocentric research about climate justice and territorial justice. She's got a doctoral degree by the Metropolitan Federal University. Thank you, Gemma, for being here. I would like to invite you for a brief greeting to our group. The floor is yours. If you would like to open your microphone and to say hello.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here above everything because I think they think that in Mexico there's not Black people, there's not Afro Mexicans, and I'm Gemma Tabares. I'm Afro Mexican and co founder of the collective called Caricolas. And currently, I also work in research. Thank you so much for the introduction, Tássia.
Thank you, Gemma. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. Now I am going to introduce Jassica St. Rose. She is an activist for human rights in St. Lucia, and she's been working as a director of the Herstoire collective, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, she said, but we are going to hear her. It's an organization that defends reproductive and sexual rights for. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. If you could open your mic, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. I am happy to be here nervous but excited as this is my first climate change talk on the Black Feminist Political Series. And I'm happy to contribute to this conversation. From St. Lucia, I'm a director of Herstoire Collective, an organization which advocates for sexual reproductive rights of women and gender nonconforming. And I look forward to the discussion and hope it all goes well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jassica. Thank you. I am now going to introduce Dandara Rudsan. She is a transvestite from Afro-Amazonia. She's also Afro-Brazilian like me. She has a degree in conflict and environmental climate. She works at the Popular Forum of Traditional Communities in Xingu. She works as someone who supports notions of combating. She's a part of the anti-prohibitionist movement. Dandara, thank you so much. If you could have a brief salutation. Thank you so much, Tássia. Thanks to everybody who's here. I'm very happy to be able to participate in this space. It's not a simple common space. It's a very important space so that we may establish a dialogue, intersectional dialogue. And I hope to be able to contribute in the best way possible. From this transvestite, Black transvestite and drug user perspective. And finally, and last but not least, I would like to introduce you to Ponsel Mafet. She is the vice president of the Green Rent Fund. She's got over 25 years of social experience supporting women in the African continent. She's got a great. It is a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for being here with us. Please salute our group. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Tássia, and thank you to you all. I'm really excited to be part of this panel with some brilliant speakers. My name is Ponzo. I am based in London. I am with the Global Green Grants Fund, and as a fund, we fund and seed environmental activism globally, of which our support to Indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant and gender-expansive people and women across the world is a key pillar. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
It is wonderful to start here in this conversation. And I would like to open up by inviting Gemma. Gemma, Afro Caracolas, we know that several sectors of society are reluctant in recognizing environmental racism. And this phenomenon of environmental crisis is a part of, we would like to hear you a little bit more about the importance of Black feminist movements, emphasizing the importance of thinking about environmental racism, remembering that you have 5 minutes for us to ensure our time.
Thank you so much for the question. Please keep me posted about the time. And even though I have the timer as well, I celebrate these kinds of spaces for Black people, for Black gender expansive people to talk about this, because the climate crisis for us isn't just about defending resources. It's also about confronting the climate crisis. We're also confronting other types of violence as Black women, as Black Afro-Mexican women, as gender expansive people. And so I think first, Caricolas is a collective of women, Cimarron, maroon women. And so I'm not sure if Cimarron or maroon space, maroon people. And so this is part of our official history, our official story, because in the context of Mexican, the Black population was recognized in 2019. And that's very important to understand the fight of the collective, of Black collectives, the fight of Black women in Mexico, because that recognition, that constitutional recognition, it was an important step. It still hasn't translated to public policies to better the racialized territories. For example, a lot of us are in the south of Mexico, in a state that's called Guerrero, and the capital of Mexico is it's about 5 hours from the capital, and it's a state that most Black people of the country live. And that is a state that, according to the institution that does the census, it's where the majority of the Black population is, and the majority of places where Blackness is felt. Blackness is Black is a political project. And so that confronts whitening, that tries to whiten territories and bodies. And we also have that context. It's also important to say, and in Guerrero in the South, we are mostly in a place that maybe you all have heard. It's a doorway. There's beaches. I don't know if you've heard Acapulco, maybe in the soap operas, but in that's the primary area that we work, and it's the most emblematic. And so that's a doorway that slavery was the legal place where enslaved people were trafficked. And so at the national level, that is the doorway with the majority Black people in Mexico. And so that's not by accident, because that has to do with the historical notion of slavery, with the historical context of slavery. And so the historical inequalities affect folks in that area in a disproportionate way. And I want to give that introduction because I want to frame that for environmental racism, because we have legislation that regulates this, because this public policy with a Black focus, with an Afro focus. We live in a territory that, unfortunately, in 2022 until today, we have confronted 3 hurricanes. And we know that experiencing a hurricane is very intense. It's huge. And so in addition to what's being experienced in the Caribbean, we have a lot of solidarity, because the climate crisis is affecting territories where majority Black people live. It's affecting people who are racialized as Black. And that's the perspective, that's what we bring, and that's the place of where we work. So we look at narratives of how to construct, how to counter racist narrative, and then how to also construct an agenda that protects the territory. And so it's also about eradicating climate crisis. And sometimes it doesn't, it's because it's such a big heart that Black women have. There's so many options that we have to create, and that we have to implement, projects that we have to implement, that does focus in Blackness, and that can support the autonomy of us. And so what we center in the debate, we center racism. We have the climate crisis, but we also have obstacles of accessing the healthcare system, or access to pleasure, or like the beaches, for example, the beaches that you all may know. The second hurricane took it all away, swept it away. And so for us, the water, the sea, the water, that's not a tourist thing. There's a important link as Black women, as Black femmes, we know that. And so that signifies that there's not, proper employment. There's not, because working, trying to confront climate crisis and environmental racism and these laws is also that it also means that we're going to have to experience and confront other kinds of violence, intersectional violence, because it hasn't been easy constructing this agenda. But we always believe that Afro Caracolas represents for our communities. It's not just a collective, or that we do things just kind of with hope, but it also means like when we're really bothered, when we're really affected by this racism, we have to dialogue with the Mexican state. We have, like, where is the anti-racist agenda? Where are the institutions that are creating the environmental policy? How can they also have a Afrocentric perspective? And we have to sit and we have to dialogue with the state. And I know that it's not something easy because, of course, we always have a position that's very critical. As civil society, we're doing what we're able to do with our hands, and so we're facing the racism, we're facing criminalization for trying to protect our territories. And then as Black women, the restoration of the manglares, this tree. And I think there's a narrative that's important that I want to say just to close. The restoration of manglares, and what does it mean, and to repair them. The manglares, it's a type of tree that protects us. Um, they're affected. They affect everything in the ecosystem, the flora and the fauna. And so from there, I will stop because I love speaking about this, but I hope that the second round I can share more. But from the perspective of Afro Caracolas, like a Black women and gender expansive collective, we're not gonna allow we're not going to stop fighting, even when we're faced with criminalization. Thank you so much, Tássia.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I know it's challenging to bring all the complexity of this fight and this struggle in such a short time. So I appreciate your attempt to summarize. And I think something that is essential for our conversation today is that it's not limited to the defense of natural resources. And when we centralize people, Black women and people of extensive gender, we need to handle something that is a complexity of violences. And then thinking of that, I'm going to pass on to our next speaker, Jassica St. Rose. And Jassica, although when we think of these dynamics and the reflections that Gemma has brought up, although the major colonial countries are the most responsible for global warming, it is countries such as the small Caribbean islands or the beaches from the Mexican coast that are the ones that are most affected by climate disasters. Furthermore, the Caribbean also faces challenges related to international ownership of land, which means countries who own lands within the Caribbean territory. Can you tell us a little bit more about how Black feminists in the Caribbean have been fighting to ensure accountability and reparations for these harms and new forms of colonialism? Reminding you that you have 5 minutes, I'll help you with time, and we'll be able to conduct our conversation. Thank you. You have the word.
Tássia, this is such an important question because the points raised here is a deep connection between the colonial history, climate crisis that we all experience in the Caribbean, and how inequalities continue to play out today in our realities. As some of you may know, the Caribbean contributes to less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions, yet we are among the hardest hit by climate crisis. As you may know, now we're in the hurricane season, and we just saw the effects of what happened in Jamaica with Hurricane Melissa. Stronger hurricanes are happening, longer droughts, eroded coastlines, destroyed infrastructure, and growing displacement of persons, of families, of infrastructures. For every one of us in the Caribbean, in St. Lucia, I speak in my context, climate change is not just an abstract issue, it's lived. We live it every day. It's personal and it's tied to the centuries of extraction and exploitation. When we talk about accountability and reparations, Black feminists, for example, myself and all of you here on the call in the Caribbean, are pushing on multiple fronts, both in political, social, and community based. We understand that colonialism never ended and it is continued. We still see it in the lives that we live every day in our reality. It probably just changed in different formats, in different ways, but it is the reality that we still live to this day. You see it in the foreign lands, in the ownerships that persons, wanting to take over, where we have large lands who are bought up for tourism. For example, in the hotel industry, we see coming into the Caribbean, taking over the lands, no access to beaches, to the beaches when the hotel ownerships take over this land and build hotels where the locals are not able to even access these local, our very own. Developing projects, pushing local families away from these farming lands. And as you know, in the Caribbean, for example, in St. Lucia, we rely very heavily on agriculture. And you see it in the aid of development systems that impose conditions instead of fostering autonomy. And you see it in small islands who are expected to rebuild over and over again when we go through this crisis after disasters caused by global systems of pollution. But for us, Black feminists across the region have been insisting on the accountability, and this must include climate reparations, not just compensation after disasters. We need some that should not be just after disasters, but it should be an ongoing thing. Redress for centuries of extractions that made these vulnerabilities possible. This includes debt collection, forgiveness, technology transfers, air trade terms, dedicated financial assistance in the form of grants, not loans. And we see that happening all the time in the Caribbean where we get the loans and we don't get grants to facilitate what is needed. This is the accountability recognizing the historical injustices and economic dependencies to continue to shape our vulnerability. When we think of the Caribbean, we think of CARICOM. And when we think of the accountability we have coming out of CARICOM, we have the CARICOM Reparations Commission that is developed through CARICOM, which calls for both historical reparations for slavery and contemporary reparation for climate harm. Feminist groups are reframing these demands through a gendered and intersectional lens. Because when we think of feminism and we have to speak on the intersectional lens as well. Making sure women, because intersectional lens, very diverse. We think of women, we think of queer persons, we think of grassroots communities are included. We have to make sure that these groups, these most vulnerable populations are included in these conversations, because without them, reparations will just produce the same hierarchy, the same thing over and over. So I believe we need these included. We need these vulnerable communities. We need these voices included in these conversations so that we can hold each other accountable. At the moment level, accountability also happens through solidarity and mutual care, which are powerful forms of resistance. Organizations like Herstoire, which I am a director, we take a grassroots approach. And I think it's important that we start from the bottom up, grassroots approach. We don't always look at climate change in the traditional sense, but we're connected to it because, as I mentioned earlier on, we're living it every day of our lives. So much of what we do, we respond to the human connection and create that human impact. Our focus at Herstoire is on wellness, sexual reproductive and reproductive health, safe spaces, which is something that's very critical and important for us doing this work that is so much coming out of trauma based. Bodily anatomy are essential for our community surviving both social and environmental crisis. And it is really about keeping the communities grounded and cared for in the ongoing crisis that we face on a daily basis. And that's a lot of the work that we do in Herstoire is connected to the human impacts from the crisis that we face. Climate justice work too, because we're addressing how climate crisis disproportionately impact women, queer people, and survivors of violence. And we see when this crisis happen in the region, how how domestic violence in fact can increase, because most times women, people from most vulnerable communities don't necessarily have the spaces, the safe spaces to go to when in times of crisis. And then we see how domestic and intimate partner violence can be increased because of these disasters and this crisis in small island states, in communities that don't have the valuable and the important resources to take care of each other.
Sim. Jassica, vou pedir para você concluir, por favor, por conta do nosso tempo, tá bem?
Okay, thank you. So I would just wrap up and say that our work is about repair, reclamation, and resilience, climate change, and reclaiming our lands and accountability. We have to be very resilient as a people, all of which are central to true accountability, resilience, reclamation, and repair. If our movements are better resourced, we could scale, expand these communities based on reparative practices into policy and regional coordination, building those feminist models, building on those feminist movements for climate adaptation rooted in justice, care, and self-determination. To me, it is real. To me, is what real reparation looks like. It's not just about the money changing hands, but power and care. And I want to stress on that. Care being redistributed. How are we looking at care? How are we redistributing care across our nations, back into our communities, back into our vulnerable communities who need it the most? Who and I think and I believe have always held the region together at the core, at the grassroots level, holding the region together and redistributing the care and holding each other accountability so that we can move better when these crises arise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very good to hear you on how colonialism has never ended and how it was reformulated. And one thing that you said that really got my attention from the beginning is how climate change is not a concept, it's not an abstract issue. It speaks and it informs about the everyday lives and about the communities and people with their own territories. And then thinking, oh, there are so many things that I could talk about, but thinking of this connection and also remembering what Gemma told us about the connection between the community and nature and how this connection cannot be reduced to natural resources. I want to invite Dandara for our conversation. Dandara, in a few days, COP30 is going to start in Belém. So in the Amazon territory, that is your territory, your place. And we know the Black feminist movements are working hard to ensure that the discussions in this convening incorporate the perspectives and demands of those who are most affected by climate changes, the traditional communities. And we now want to emphasize the pressures that are offered to Quilombola communities, indigenous communities, Ribeirinhas communities. So I would like you to talk about that a little bit more. and about the connection with these people and the connection with their land. The 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 very holding of COP30 is being mentioned for negatively impacting these communities. So I'll open the floor so you can contribute, and I will please ask you for your support to managing time.
Perfect. Thank you. Can you hear me well? Perfect. Thank you so much for this question. I would like to state, first of all, that we wear several hats. I am a woman who lives at the margins of the river. There was an situation that took me away from this territory, and within this perspective, copy 30 really it had to be critiqued because of the participation of these communities. It's fundamental that this in this region, in Belém do Pará, it's necessary. But since the beginning, with we didn't have the possibility of participating as civil society that has been affected directly by the COP because of bureaucracy, because of the dynamics of the COP. We realized that it's extremely bureaucratic, and since it happens in Brazil and in the Amazonian region, as a woman from a traditional community who lived at the margins of a river, it doesn't make sense for us that our demands are not being engaged with. And this is one of our critiques. We didn't have the possibility of participating with the type of fluidity in this process. We still have difficulties to obtain credentials in several spaces, several types of zones, but there's no zones that allow traditional communities to offer their perspectives. And what are we doing in terms of minimizing this or going against this? We have two main strategies. First, we are creating forums, popular forums, with a popular forum for leaders for climate emergency in order to confront. There's a group of women coming to Belém, although we are not going to have direct access to the forum. We have forums that are being organized for other regions of the legal Amazon region who are coming, and these forums help us to engage with our demands, and we had to build a parallel event in order for us to participate, called the People's Summit, that is going to be taking place at the same time in a different space, however, gathering these forums so that our demands are engaged with. We're going to have a popular tribunal about the genocide against traditional people, and we are going to provide denunciations against traditional people in the space of the federal government. And our main strategy in this amount of people, we have several protest agendas that are organized for us to protest at the doors of the event, writing so that they listen and see the claims of us who were treated as outsiders. Our voices are not going to be silenced. So in these forums, we are going to organize activities such as the People's Tribunal. We are going to organize the People's Summit that is going to gather up over 3,000 communities that are going to take place at the Pará Federal University. And we are going to protest and knock on doors of authorities because our voices we are not going to be inside the event, but our voices are going to be engaged with. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing us the strategies, the daring strategies and fundamental strategies in confronting these official spaces of negotiation. And in order to wrap up, Alfonso, you are a Black feminist who works in funding agencies that are committed to climate justice funding solutions and alternatives created by grassroots movements. However, we still realize that we know that there are funders that do not understand climate justice and gender justice and racial justice as as intersectional, that see environmental justice, that sees environmental justice as separate movements for social justice. How do we deconstruct this perspective?
Thank you, Tássia, and thank you to my fellow speakers. I suspect that I will be reinforcing some of the messages that have already been shared. But I want to start in response to your question, Tássia, by saying that for me, I think at this point, you have to assume that those funders who are still struggling to understand the intersections between climate justice, gender justice, and racial justice are doing so consciously and deliberately and ignoring the facts and the evidence that's right in front of them. As my fellow speakers have shared, we know that the climate and environmental crisis is rooted in histories of colonial injustice and racialized capitalism and patriarchy. And there is a dominance of a destructive, extractive global economic system that links carbon emissions, habitat destruction, and other environmental harms with the systemic violation of the rights of minoritized communities. We know that the solutions to environmental harm and social injustice come from those whose lives are most impacted. And we know that the communities and movements most impacted by the climate and nature crisis are resisting. We know they're resisting the current economic paradigm and that they are demonstrating alternatives. And yet they receive less than 1% of global philanthropic funding, and that only 0.22% of climate funding went to feminist organizations. And when I think about the funders in this space, I see broadly three different types. There are climate funders who have significant resources, much of that money coming from the tech industry on the west coast of the US. There are conservation funders, very much focused on habitat protection and preservation, and there are human rights funders. And in the same way that other sectoral funders tend to fund in silos, so do the climate funders and environmental funders. And they rarely reflect the intersectional, movement-focused and community-driven aspirations and priorities. I would say that all of the critiques that we have about the funding paradigm are very much reflected, if not amplified, when it comes to conservation and climate funders. This is all despite the fact, as we've all said, that the solutions to environmental harm and social injustice have to come from those whose lives are most impacted. And in fact, that democracy itself, without solutions to community-driven climate and environmental justice, democracy itself is threatened, because there are strong links between action to address climate and environmental crisis and action to strengthen democracy. And for democracy, it requires the participation of all people in decision making, and a strong environmental rule of law is crucial to delivering action on climate change. And I just want to very subtly broaden out the framing to one of environmental justice, of which climate justice is an element that focuses specifically on the impacts of climate change. And for me, the environmental justice encompasses the idea that the same inequities that cause poverty and hardship, so racial and gender inequities, are also linked to environmental harm and create different levels of impact across the various communities, and particularly for women, gender expansive, and Black communities. And for real justice to happen, the communities that are most affected by injustice absolutely have to have a say in how their communities are shaped. They must be involved in creating solutions to address existing injustices. And this requires funders, ourselves included, to understand this interconnection between climate and environmental justice and democracy and social injustice, because they are deeply intertwined. Because grassroots and environmental justice movements are on the front lines of defending both democracy and the environment, especially in communities that are facing harassment and violence for their activism. The rise in violence and intimidation of Black and brown women and gender expansive environmental defenders, whether they're in Louisiana, in Honduras, Brazil, or Tanzania, in context where democratic space is shrinking dramatically, we absolutely see extractive capitalism and neoliberalism as the predominant economic models. And the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards are definitely not random, but the product of the same social and economic structures which produced segregation and other racial oppression. As funders, we absolutely need to understand that the political environmental challenges are more urgent than ever. And so to address this, grassroots and global environmental movements that are led by Indigenous, Black and brown women and gender expansive activists who we know are key and holding the line and defending the commons, must be funded. They must be funded with more, better intersectional funding, because it's only their persistence which keeps the demand for a just, sustainable world alive. And if we're ever to have any chance of a just future, they absolutely need to be resourced. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ponso. Thank you for the care with the time. It's very important, everything you bring, particularly because of the necessity of recognizing and bringing awareness to this link between democracy and socioeconomic rights and its intrinsic relationship with historical inequalities, racism, and environmental crisis. So this approach needs to include all of these issues. Before inviting our next round of questions, I would like to remind you that you may write your questions in the chat box or directly in this space for Q&A. And we are compiling these questions, and we are going to find the right time to share these questions with our lecturers. This is the second round of questions. We start with Gemma. Gemma, I would like to go back and talk to you about the context of Mexico and how this population has been facing the challenges linked to their existence in their lives. You talked about how the Afro-Mexican population has been only officially recognized in 2019, and Afro Caracolos has been fostering the work that talks about the fact that Afro-Mexicans have been the most impacted by issues of environmental crisis. Could you share a bit more about these connections in terms about how the climate crisis has an impact on these Afro-Mexican communities, and what kind of solutions is your organization offering? You have 5 minutes.
In the case of Afro Mexicans, I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact that climate injustice has had and the tangible effects it has, like, for example, with hurricanes. And it's not that climate injustice, the climate change is only hurricanes. The loss of flora and fauna. It's also for fishing as well. We've lost flora and fauna. Now there are no longer fishes in the sea. And so the women who were fisher women, our grandmothers, our mothers who were dedicated to fishing, for example, they can't. They no longer have this product for the impact, because of the impact of hurricanes. It impacts everything. It impacts the economy, and there is no it's not a formal job. And so this lack of economy, local economy, it affects the mental health and their ability to access other services and other systems. It's very stressful. So now we have to think of things like a manual for prevention and how can we act. So mental health, fishing industry, it also affects, it also impacts things like gender-based violence. So women going to things like workshops and stuff, these things allow them an opportunity to empower themselves. It has been a bit complicated, this particular topic. It affects children and young people. They don't work necessarily. I really appreciated the reflection on democracy before. We can't have democracy without the work of Black women, these women working in policy. They are the ones who are going to decide what the laws are going to be like, and they are the ones who are able to transform our realities. We need to be able to have women like these as political representation también. We want to have a point of contact to really position the crisis, the climate crisis. But we are literally on the coast. So in terms of other solutions, 1 minute. So we need, in terms of integral health systems access, a restoration, projects that are long-term. When we as Black women think of this money has to be not just for short-term, but for long-term. It has to be able to accomplish the things that we desire for it to accomplish. So the restoration of marine life, and also looking at alternative ways to harvest. Also the impact on access to medicine and to potable water. We need to also have healthy practices in terms of how we interact with the environment. These are some of the solutions that I have. Our agenda, and something that we've been posting on our social media. We need like intersectional tools, not just centered on gender. So what's in our bodies also translating to our land.
Thank you, Gemma. It's very important, this reflection that has been coming in many different ways. In our first round, the deepening of violences in the context of environmental crisis, remembering and establishing a connection. I would like to invite Saint Rose for the second browse. Jassica, are you here? Great. We know that your organization has a key role in mitigating the damage that was caused by Hurricane Barry and now Belisa that has hit Jamaica last week. Your organization, once again, has also played this important role. We haven't talked about supporting Black feminist movements before climate crisis, and you have drawn attention to this issue, to the importance first of not only grants and land and money that is lent, but also the importance of a continuous preparation. May you tell us about why these structures of preparation must be funded instead of just being displayed when disaster hits? 5 minutes, Jassica.
Thank you again, Tássia. And honestly, this is a very timely question. Knowing we're in the hurricane season, we just saw what Jamaica went through. And sometimes it's already too late for too many people. In the Caribbean, hurricanes like Beryl, Melissa are becoming more frequent. We see it happening all the time. Yes, the hurricane season ends in November, but if my memory serves me right, I remember some years ago in St. Lucia, we had what we call, we named it the Christmas trough, where we saw that even after the hurricane season, we had about 5 or 6 hours of continuous rains, which caused so much flooding. And we as feminist organizations on the ground not having the funds to assist, and that's why we know that, and I want to stress on that preparedness preparedness is feminist work, and this is why we need to have continuous funding to sustain these organizations to do this work on the ground. And when we go through this climate crisis, when they hit, it's not just about damaged homes, and it's about more about communities being already stretched thin, health system under strain, and vulnerable people left behind in response plans that they don't even see, they don't even get to understand. And this is where Herstoire as an organization, as a feminist organization, comes in. And and because of these, we are placed in areas where we coordinate and mobilize emergency wellness barrels to neighboring islands. We coordinate, we collaborate with other organizations in the region doing this work to provide care items for when we are going through this crisis. Um, Coordinate to neighboring islands with care items that they are always forgotten forgotten in the traditional relief. For example, menstrual supplies, teas, reproductive health items, comfort kits for women, queer folk, and survivors of violence. That is feminist response, because we are not only thinking about survival, but emotional and social care, dignity, and recovery. But here's the thing, the kind of work can't just happen after disaster. And like I mentioned previously, preparedness itself must be funded. And this is why it is feminist work. When we invest in our local feminist movements before crises, we can train communities in trauma response, and how to be more informed in the responses and how to create that collective care. And for example, with Herstoire, we've been delivering trauma-centered training for mental health practitioners, CSO, government agencies, and even community members, even vulnerable population, vulnerable persons like women and queer folk, together in partnership with the University of Utah. And these trauma trainings are tailored to address the traumas that exist, survivors of trauma in areas of crisis and LGBTQI persons. When we invest in local feminism, we also strengthen safe spaces, both virtual and in person, that offer psychological support that can double the healing during disasters. So we need that. So it's not just about, like I mentioned earlier on, it's not just about damaged home, but it's not just about damaged homes, but coming together collectively to address these traumas that exist. And by doing so, we build and strengthen cross island regional solidarity, which is so important, the solidarity, the collective care within our networks, so that when a disaster hits one island, the others are ready to respond immediately because we have that collaborative response already there. So when we talk about climate preparedness in our region, it's not only about infrastructure, but our
Jassica,
story.
1 minute.
1 minute, okay. So in short, I will continue saying that um, preparedness is feminist work, and I want to stress on that because we don't just need the fund to come around when a disaster hit. We need to prepare before, and we need to continue the work even after to continue providing care, which is so important, and support for these traumas that we go through because we live it every day. This is our experience every day. Climate change is real, and we experience it a lot in the Caribbean. We can't be keeping expecting grassroots women and queer to show up after the fact without recognizing that this is a year-round work. It's a continuous work, fostering resilience, healing, and autonomy. It's exactly what keeps communities standing in crisis together. Black feminist movements in the Caribbean are already doing the work, mostly on short, very limited budgets. Imagine what would be possible if we had this money coming in all the time. We had these structures in place to continue doing this work throughout the years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jassica, for expanding on how
The importance of preparation is feminist work. Thank you. Now we go to Dandara. In Brazil, activists and environmentalists are victims of violence in terms of those who oppose climate justice. Could you talk to us about this reality in order to ensure the safety of those who struggle
Thank
on
you
behalf of
very
climate
much,
justice?
Yeah. In a timeline that I will jump from one thing to another, but there is the attempt to protect people who fight for climate justice. And that did not start with the Bolsonaro government. This has been happening since 2004 with the letter by bishops written by the Catholic Church, in which the extreme far right starts to attack. And then we went through a coup. And then we went through Bolsonaro government. And then there was a dismantling of the legal structures that were protecting legally the environment. And then all of the crises, all of the damages that Bolsonaro government has put us through, allied with other powers, especially aligned with the extreme far right, who attack people who fight for climate justice in Brazil, it's going to take us 1 or 2 decades to be able to conquer back what the damage that was done by the legal dismantling, the legal disprotection that we were submitted to, when that has a direct impact it's the most dangerous region. Yes? Your audio was cut, but please go on. Okay. And so, oh, I lost my track of thought. So Bolsonaro government had put us through this legal dismantling aligned with other forces, and one of them is the far right wing. And this legal dismantling that we evaluated in at least 2 decades, which we were submitted to, and that has a reflection in the lives of people who fight for the Amazon forest, which has made the Amazon region and the state of Pará, which is one of the most important areas for human rights. And what must be done, in my perception, is first of all, the state needs to be held accountable for the lives of people who advocate for human rights. And that needs to happen I have just been told.
É que a gente está com um problema com a tradução em inglês.
Thank you, Dandara. Let me just.
Me avisar, me desculpa.
She's back. Okay. Thank you, Maria. Yes, it's all back.
Obrigada, Dandara.
I am here.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make sure people can hear you appropriately. You have 1 minute to conclude your thought, please.
Dandara. Obrigada. Pode continuar. Desculpa te
And so, to sum it up,
as pessoas estão te
what the government needs to do,
minuto para concluir. Por favor.
especially because the state needs to be held accountable, is there are state and federal protection programs, and the state of Pará has recently presented data about people who were put through this program. And we found out that the military police was infiltrated in this program, and the national program has a lot of bureaucracy to assist these people. So all of this is happening because of failures that are strategic failures in my point of view, through these programs. And so for me, the solution is the state needs to be held accountable and open. And then the first path would be to have a better structure of the protection programs, both in the state and federal levels, and to have a more robust program to protect these people. Because the people who are involved with trafficking, but the state needs to be held accountable in a better way throughout the country. Thank you very much, Dandara. This Amazon context and the Brazilian context is directly reflected in other global contexts. And so it's very important to hear you so we understand what it takes to expand and guarantee the protection of the leadership who are in the front line and fighting for environmental justice. So thank you very much. To close this round, Ponce, I'm gonna invite you for the second time in a row. So I would like to invite you to share what lessons you learned by financing Black feminist movements that fight for environmental and social justice? And what is the message that you would like to leave to other sponsors? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. So my first lesson is to funders is to say that Black women know. We've been knowing, we've always been knowing. And in terms of the messages, I have a list of demands. The first one is to say that we do not, as Black women and gender expansive folks, live single issue lives. You have to fund intersectionally. Climate justice, environmental justice, social justice, and democracy are intertwined. Secondly, fund environmental justice, because you understand that the same social inequities that cause poverty and hardship are also linked to environmental and climate justice. Sorry, I'm getting the translation. Hang on one second. Yeah, sorry. Thirdly, understand that without environmental and climate justice, democracy is threatened, and without environmental justice, there is no social justice. Understand that false solutions and funding carbon capture, carbon credits, and those technical solutions to climate are exactly false and technical, and that excluding Indigenous and Afro-descendant women and communities from the resources that their knowledge, care, and stewardship have nurtured for centuries, so that global corporations and governments in the global north can say, look what we did, is myopic and it is short-sighted. Next, to say that safety and security should not be the burden of justice activists who are protecting our commons and our world. Care and well-being are not optional add-ons. They are essential and they must be funded. Next, that those communities that are most exposed and impacted by human-made environmental hazards were and still are largely Black. But in the spaces where the issues are discussed, all those closed-door invitation-only meetings, whether they're funding meetings or policy meetings, the experts and speakers, with the exception of a small number of what I would say token, ethnic folks, they're nearly always white male spaces with no understanding of the context, the realities, the aspirations, and the dreams of Black women. Finally, we know that Black and Afro-descendant feminists have been leading their own charge for climate, environmental, and social justice. We have always done the work. We are our own cavalry, and we are a movement, a global movement that moves in solidarity with each other. And so my closing message is nothing new. It is to say and to insist that funders fund Black women. And why? Because Black women know. Thank you.
Thank you, Ponso. Black women know. And this panel is just one more show of how many knowledges, how much there is that we are aware of, and how much we can find in Black feminist movements. To end our panel, I have 4 questions that our team that's been reading the questions you've been asking, we selected, and we have time to answer to these 4. I know that there are several others, but sadly we have a short time. So thank you for your understanding. I organized the questions. There are 2 that are more connected to financing, funding, and 2 others that are more connected to the movements. And so I'll read these questions, share with you, and then each panelist will have 2 minutes to comment them in a generalized way. I know it's a big effort, but I do count on your support to make sure we have enough room for everyone to answer. So let's follow the same order. Let's start with Gemma. So the first two questions that we received were Black feminist organizations from different African countries face several challenges related to lack of funding to face and to fight for climate justice. While our communities are suffering the direct effects of climate change, for which they did not contribute to, something that we deeply discussed today. Which organizations are sponsoring these initiatives of climate justice? So this is more connected to this philanthropic universe. Who is sponsoring? A second question that is related to this universe is the far right wing and patriarchy and anti-gender groups are being deeply sponsored by corporations that pollute and cause environmental harm. What actions can we take as a global feminist movement to fight these efforts? So if from one side we have a lack of funding for groups that are facing climate change, on the other hand, we have a big funding for those who are actually contributing to polluting and to far right movements, people who fight against gender rights. So I'd like you to talk about that a little bit and what we can do. And the last two questions are, in your opinion, what are the steps? What is the first concrete step to integrate the perspective of Black women in climate policies? And I think that is a very strategic question, thinking of this month that has to do with COP30 and the March of Black Women in Brazil. And so I think it's important to listen to all of you. And the last one is, what are the local strategies or community strategies that might be used to strengthen leadership and the answers to climate change? So then more focused on things that we can do in terms of local and community level. I'll give all of you 2 minutes and I'll start with Gemma.
We have to be in places of power so that we have a more active role. This would mean that it also relates to strategies at the local and community level. And it's really to promote in Mexico, to promote the Black identity, because when we're able to recognize it, and when we look at the statistics, for a local strategy, it would really be, it's a small thing, but it's something that has a big impact. We need to have a lot more visibility, and also in terms of the defense of the territory and land. You need to have a consciousness that you are part of this movement of Black women, and you have to do your work, your role. That's one of the problems that we have, the representation, political level representation. There are people who occupy places of leadership for Black women who really are not Black women.
Can you repeat the question? Because I was just writing down some points. I saw a question in the chat, so I don't know if something about what measures can take place as global feminist movement to combat the efforts. Is that the question?
Não era essa a questão, mas se você quiser responder essa questão, não tem problema.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, I'll answer this one because I was trying to figure out all the questions at the same time. Okay, so for me, I think what measures can take place as global feminist movement to combat the efforts? I think visibility on the work that we do needs to be put more out there. And also more collaborations with other feminist organizations to continue this work, building on cross-country networks kind of can aid in building on the resilience that we do. Collaborations are very important. And I think that when we collaborate and when we come together, when we build on the network, we can build on our resilience, and we can also be prepared and for when disasters and emergency relief um, needs to be at the time when we need it. We are prepared. Um, Structural inequities, but also knowing that we also end with the possibility that things can be restored properly when we break down and when we come together. And I just want to stress on everything ties back to resistance and community care and community togetherness and being prepared as a collective unit. And that's why we need the work that we do, and what the speaker before me spoke about, the visibility is so important to combat and to strengthen on our leadership in the region and to strengthen on the work that we do. So I just wanted to say that, and I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Jassica. Ponsu, Dandara sadly lost her internet connection, so she will not be able to be with us for this last round. That's why I'm passing the word to you.
Thank you. I echo and double affirm what both Gemma and Jessica Rose have shared. I think I will just add a few small things. I think one is that showing the interconnectedness of the struggles that we experience in our communities and making these connections between a healthy environment, a just climate approach, democracy and social justice are really key, so that the funders who come in with sectoral funding are not able to divide and conquer the efforts that communities always do in ways that are collaborative and connected. Also, on top of that, demonstrating solidarity. As Jessica shared, we very much have seen and been impacted by the devastation from Hurricane Melissa, and it's incumbent on all of us as individuals and as funder organizations absolutely to support the restoration, but also to ensure that we support resilient systems so that communities can deal with crises before they hit. From my perspective, we work with our fellow funders to advocate for the funding to go to communities in ways that support communities to do the work that they need to do. Trust-based, flexible, multi-year funding. And the last thing that I will say is, however we present it, evidence matters. We can no longer rely on the good nature of those who've got the money to open their purses and say, here's your money. We have to be able to show them that the work that we've been doing for centuries, the work that we've been doing collectively, is the only solution to addressing the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you
Muito
very much,
obrigada,
Ponso.
Ponso.
Thank
Muito
you,
obrigada a
everyone
todas
who
e
was
todos de
with
vocês que
us
estiveram com a
today.
gente.
Thank you for the
Agradeço aos
panelists, and I'll pass the
panelistas. E
word
agora
to
eu vou
Maria
passar para a
Clara
Maria
so
Clara
she
encerrar a nossa
can close
conversa.
our conversation. Thank you, Tássia. What a joy. And what an enriching moment in terms of the learnings we had today. I feel privileged, in fact, for spending this time with all of you and hear you speak about how necessary it is to incorporate this Black feminist perspective when we discuss climate change, how important it is that we build structures of preparation and that these structures are funded, as well as the importance of guaranteeing that activists, of people who fight for the environment, who are Black feminist women, are able to do their work safely without becoming targets of violence. both from an institutional perspective as well as from a public safety in the territory they work for. So thank you so much for this debate. As the partnership coordinator of the Black Feminist Fund, once again, I am very happy and proud, and I feel very privileged to be able to listen and learn from the movements that we support. So I want to close everything by thanking Tássia, our fellow from the Black Feminist Fund, for leading this conversation. And I want to thank each one of the speakers for accepting our invitation. So Jassica, Lucia, Dandara Hudson from RENFA from Brazil, Gemma from Afro Caracolas in Mexico, and Ponso, who is also part of our Black feminist networks from philanthropy. I would also like to thank Naima and Alex, who helped us with all of the logistics so that this webinar could come to be. Everybody from the Black Feminist Fund who is working behind the scenes to make sure everything is working. All interpreters, because without interpretation, we would not be able to make this conversation in a transnational level. So thank you to all of you who spent your morning, your afternoon, your night with us. I ask you to please answer our survey that you will receive as soon as our call is over. And I also want to share that the Black Feminist Politics series will be back next year. Bye. Good day, good afternoon, and good night. Bye.